The Velikovsky Heresies by Laird Scranton. You're listening to Brothers of the Serpent podcast.
And we are back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, angels and demons, monsters and serpents. This is the Brothers of the Serpent podcast, coming to you not live, once again, from the 10 by 10 by 10 tangent cube of science. When once again, nestled amongst the dusty bones of an ancient seabed, high atop the Everest Plateau. I think some of the stuff we visited last week was also an ancient seabed.
Oh, yeah.
We had a fantastic trip, some of which you heard about on the roadsode. Sorry that was so late. There was just everything. We had so much traveling to do over the course of the trip that there was never really a good time to set up and record. And of course, you know, there were people there who had paid to be there and hang out with Randall. So us setting up for a podcast in some hotel room and kicking everyone out to do that for a couple of hours would take away from their experience. So we didn't want to do that. So we waited until basically after the trip was over. You guys heard us. We were in Darren's house. Darren was one of the attendees, and him and his wife graciously allowed us to stay, cooked us dinner, as you heard. It was fantastic. Their kids were hilarious. It was quite exciting.
Yep, and they let us set up the equipment in one of the rooms, and
yeah,
it was cool.
That's right. So we did.
Much thanks to them.
Yeah,
appreciate it. Darren and Casey.
Yep, and Darren came on the show with us, which was cool. You know, I asked him, I was like, "Why don't you come on the show?" He's like, "All right," just straight up. Most people are like, "Hell no," but he was like, "All right, cool." So that was fun, and it's interesting. He lives right there by Murray Springs, and he kind of told me the story of how, you know, he starts paying attention to Randall, and then he hears this term, Murray Springs, and he's like, I think that might be in my area. And he said he was, you know, kind of driving from his house, and he was leaving his town, and he was like, I'll just check out where it is on my GPS, right? And he routes it, and he says, the GPS keeps trying to tell me to turn around. And I'm like, no, this isn't right. You know, come on, where is this thing? And then finally he figures out it's like 5 minutes from his house in the other direction. He's like, holy crap, this thing is right next to me. It's totally unmarked. You wouldn't even know it's there. So it was good to have him, you know, have him there, because it would have been hard to find.
Yeah. Plus, we got there right at twilight, and the note on the gate says, this gate is locked at twilight.
Yeah, at dusk.
At dusk.
Yeah.
And he was like, don't worry, I put a note on the lock. Let's go.
Yeah.
So like, we probably would not have gone in.
Yeah, we don't want to be locked in there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was cool. We got some samples of the black mat. Which is pretty exciting, something we've talked about so many times on this show and on Cosmographia, and to actually see it in person.
Yeah, that was really cool.
And now to touch it and have samples of it, and to think to yourself, like, this was caused by this.
This is the barrier between two worlds.
Yeah. So, very, very exciting and awesome trip. And of course, Meteor Crater. I mean, I know we talked about this on the roadsode, but that really made an impression on me. That's a giant hole in the ground. and of course the geology all around it is just amazing. You can really and this is considered a small impact.
Yeah, especially when you do excavating. Like, we've excavated a lot of stuff with heavy machinery.
That's right.
And to walk up to that hole and realize that this massive thing, all of these however many tons of earth, were completely removed in a matter of seconds.
Yeah.
And just excavated this hole, like the power.
Right. What is it, like 600 feet deep?
Yes.
Yeah. So a kilometer, if somebody came up to me and was like, all right, here's a backhoe. I need a hole that's a kilometer across and 600 feet deep.
It's just like...
it's going to take a while. Nope. A couple of seconds for this rock. It was also surprising to find out, you know, in the museum in there, of course, they have the little piece of it, which Brad said was watermelon size, but I don't know what kind of watermelon he gets.
It's more like giant pumpkin size.
Yeah. But the stats and stuff in the museum said that as far as they can tell, the thing was 98% nickel iron.
Yeah. A bullet.
Yeah. Now I wonder if that's just all that made it
caused it.
All that made it to the surface.
Yeah.
You know, it may have been a much larger object surrounded by chondritic, fuzzy, like space rock. And all that made it to the surface was the iron bullet that was embedded in that stuff.
Yeah.
But
I don't know.
Yeah. And it was cool too to see there were plaques there talking about Behringer, and how he fought the establishment idea that it was a volcanic something or other for 25 years. He was basically, and he's a geologist, for 25 years he was trying to convince people, no, this is an impact from space. And of course they had in the museum, they had photos of the newspaper kid holding up the newspaper that says rock, the sky is falling, like they're making fun of him.
Oh man.
So yeah, I read the plaque and I was just like, good on you, buddy. You never gave up. And now they named it after you. I mean, people call it Meteor Crater, but the actual name of it is Behringer's Crater, or Behringer Crater. So, and now there's what did they call it? Is it the Behringer Foundation or
something like that?
Yeah. There's a
spot,
there's a company or a foundation or something that was set up by the family. So the crater, it's on private land, and they maintain a facility there for guests. And according to the stuff I read in the museum, it says that your entrance fees that you pay to get in, I think we paid, it was $22 a person. All of that goes towards further scientific studies and paying for that kind of stuff of the crater, and of course maintaining the facility. But that's cool. So it was a little high for like a museum fee, but I understand they're paying for science. So
yeah.
So that was good. And much more about the trip, but we did talk about it on the roadsode. So I don't know how much more I want to rehash all that stuff. Is just I keep wanting to talk about it because it was so awesome.
Yeah, one thing I will say is that that trip was totally paid for by the donations to this podcast.
That's right.
For us to go. So
that's right.
Thanks to all of you. It actually was a very expensive trip because it was such last minute notice, and we had to scramble to get plane tickets and a rental car, and it was just. But we had the funds to do it thanks to all of you. So that's what we promised to do with the funds, and we did it.
That's right.
And now we need more.
That's right. Now we're broke. Help us out.
But thank all of you so much making that possible for us to do at the spur of the moment.
Yeah. Yeah, that was really nice. It was a nice feeling.
Yeah.
We're out there and we're doing stuff and we're like, well, we need this thing, but we can get it because of the support to the podcast. So
yeah,
it's really great. So yes, thank you guys so much and keep doing it. And just like the very first commercial you made, it was, promise made true.
Yeah.
Like, are you tired of hearing a new Snake Bros episode every Wednesday? Yeah. Donate to the pyramid scheme. They'll run off to explore some ancient crater.
And you won't have to see a new episode pop up in your feed on Wednesday.
That's right. That's exactly what happened. That's not a good incentive. Oh, and the Watcher is joining us. He is here. We had to do some rewiring to get him on the show, but I think he is here. Right, buddy?
We're using this old Randall Carlson technology setup here with the actual, we called a landline.
That's right.
So that we didn't crowd the Watcher's crappy internet connection so that he could still look stuff up for us. How you doing, buddy?
Doing all right. I feel special because we're doing this on a landline, and that's only for Randall, so it makes me feel like I matter.
Yeah, it's pretty old school, right?
It is.
Can you just like pretend to be telling us some story about an alien abduction or something? Because I mean, it kind of sounds like Coast to Coast. What did you call for, Brett?
Well, I was driving home down a dark, deserted highway when suddenly I saw lights in the sky. And it was a giant billboard saying, "Donate to the pyramid scheme."
Oh, that's amazing there, Brett. Thanks for the call.
God, love it.
So where are you? Can you say? Is it super secret?
Yeah. No, I'm at Border Patrol station in Comstock, Texas.
In space.
So it's about 25 miles north of Del Rio and the Amistad National Recreation Area. It's maybe like an hour around the Horn down from Big Bend National Park.
Ah, okay. But you're in space at that place.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right.
The border of
That's
Texas
where the relay
goes
station is.
all the way to space.
The relay station.
It
is in
relays
space.
down there and then bounces, through some government network hubby dealy things and then back to me in space. It's a loop. A space loop.
All right, man. Well, glad to have you here. However it works.
Yep.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, it always
I'm
helps.
really
out.
excited for this stuff that we're going to be covering tonight because it's actually completely brand new to me, which doesn't happen all that often anymore.
All right. Yeah. Yeah, the Velikovsky stuff is good. So we will be getting into that later. All right. But first, Space Weather News from spaceweather.com. Incoming solar storm cloud. A slow-moving coronal mass ejection is headed for Earth, sort of. Most of the storm cloud will miss our planet, but the flanks of the CME should graze Earth's magnetic field on November 1st, which will spark geomagnetic storms and bright auroras around the Arctic Circle. Also, something flary this way comes. The biggest sunspot of new solar cycle 25 appeared this week. They're about to have company. 2 more active regions are poised to rotate over the sun's eastern rim, circled in this October 30th image from NASA's Solar Dynamics Observatory. So there's a photo here where they're circled, and you can see the flares poking over the rim. You guys want to check this picture out, go to spaceweather.com. He says, what we're seeing here are plasma-filled magnetic arches of the type that often tower over sunspot groups. The sunspots themselves, if they exist, are still hidden behind the edge of the sun. Solar rotation will bring them into view this weekend, so amateur astronomers with safety-filtered telescopes are encouraged to monitor the developments. Current conditions: solar wind speed is 403.3 kilometers per second. The density is a medium to high, 7.2 protons per cubic centimeter. Current sunspot number is 35. Wow. And so obviously the spotless days stretch is 0. Total spotless days for 2020 so far, 204, which we're down to 67%, which we were back up around 70 not too long ago. So. And let's see, neutron counts. Today is rated at 9.3% plus or high above the space age average. So there you go.
Right on.
Space Weather News.
And from NASA.gov, I'm sure many of you have heard, NASA's Stratospheric Observatory for Infrared Astronomy, SOFIA, has confirmed for the first time water on the sunlit surface of the moon. This discovery indicates that water may be distributed across the lunar surface and not limited to cold, shadowed places. SOFIA has detected water molecules in Clavius Crater, one of the largest craters visible from Earth, located on the moon's southern hemisphere. Previous observations of the moon's surface detected some form of hydrogen, but were unable to distinguish between water and its close chemical relative hydroxyl, which is just oxygen and hydrogen. Data from this location reveal water in concentrations of 100 to 412 parts per million, roughly equivalent to a 12-ounce bottle of water trapped in a cubic meter of soil spread across the lunar surface. The results are published in the latest issue of Nature Astronomy. Scientists say that this discovery challenges their understanding of the lunar surface and raises intriguing questions about resources relevant for deep space exploration. So, yeah.
It is, as comparison, the Sahara Desert has 100 times the amount of water that Sophia detected in the lunar soil.
Yeah.
That's a lot. So even in the Sahara,
it's not very much on the moon.
yeah.
But yeah, they're trying to figure out how, because they're trying to figure out how this water is able to stay in this area with no atmosphere, not evaporate, not turn into a gas.
Yep. And the headlines keep making a big deal about it being on the sunlit surface.
Right.
Which is weird because all surfaces of the moon are sunlit at some point or another. So I'm not sure what they mean by that. But
That maybe when it's sunlit, it's a gas,
yeah,
and then when it goes back in shadow, it crystallizes and
Yeah.
falls to the surface, maybe.
yeah, maybe.
Or I don't know if it's crystallized.
Because the days on the moon last for 2 weeks. The day, a day period, roughly
Yeah.
2 weeks, because its day is a month long.
Right.
So it's when the moon is sunlit on any given side, it's lit for 2
Yeah, but there's-
weeks straight. That's
But
pretty
there's a
high.
lot of shadows.
That's true. Yeah, there
Still
are
a lot of
shadows. And they found this down in a crater.
Yeah.
So I wonder how old that crater is supposed to be.
Yeah, I don't know.
Because it would be hard to say, if it's remnants from little cometary impacts. I wonder if that's what it is.
Oh yeah. Pieces
How
still
long?
down in the
Yeah, how
crater.
long would that last? But if that crater is really old, they're supposed to be really old. The water should be gone. I don't know. I think that article is right. It challenges lots of ideas about the moon.
Yeah. They released a statement earlier. I can't remember what day it was. It was like at the beginning of our trip or something. That they were going to be releasing some new information on the moon. And
Yeah, that's
I was
right.
hoping it would be Hollow Moon, but it's not. It's too bad. Still cool.
Yeah. So we have a 1-Up box.
Oh yeah.
I have a note here from the 1-Up box. It says, Snake Bro Russ and Kyle and Snake Wife Laura. Matt in Delaware here. You may remember me from such emails as, do you even Snake Bro? Or such Apple Podcast reviews as, do you even Snake Bro? I wanted to thank you so much for the butt flap rattling 1-Up box you sent with the Brothers of the Serpent hat and all the other incredible goodies. I can't tell you how thrilling it was to open. There was far more than I expected, and I love the stone artifact and bivalve fossil. Wow, serendipitously, I was recently re-listening to the Earth in Upheaval series, and Russ, you made the comment that closed bivalve fossils means they were buried alive, a la a cataclysm, meaning that this fossil is tangible evidence of the very ideas you discuss on the show and with Randall on Cosmographia. I mean, how freaking cool is that? 5 snake stars for Laura on sourcing these hats. The embroidered logo looks beautiful, and I have been wearing my new favorite hat on the daily, promoting the show to every Johnson I run into. This should explain the big jump in Delaware downloads I'm sure you've seen. In this box, I have included 2 books for the bros, Secrets of the Lost Races, which seems right up your Upart alley, and the Giza template, as well as a little thank you gift for Laura.
Uh-huh.
Kyle and Laura, congrats and wishing you both the best with your second child. Keep on chasing them pyramids, bros. Shout out to the Snake Force. Snakes! Much love from Delaware. Matt.
Thanks, buddy.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, man. I gotta check this.
Yeah, we got the Giza template, Ed's book,
template. Awesome.
and Secrets of the Lost
And he's
Races.
got a little note in here. Snake Bros. Keep chasing pyramids.
All right.
That's awesome. Oh man, yeah, I can't wait to go through those. Thanks, buddy. Secrets of the Lost
Secrets
Races.
of the Lost Races.
Yeah,
Uparts.
and I will give Laura her secret gift.
Oh, it's
But
separately wrapped.
I'm taking a peek. I didn't know. I think it's.
I love snakes.
Dude, she's gonna love this.
She's gonna love it.
Appreciate it. Much appreciated. Warm and fuzzies.
Warm and fuzzies. All right. Got some emails. What time we got? All right. We got 10 minutes. And this first one is from Roddy the Mammal. Dear Ophidian siblings, your talk on magnetism on episode 170 brought to mind a question I've always had about magnets. The standard diagram of a magnet shows the magnetic field flowing out of its north pole and flowing into its south pole. If one is to accept this diagram as true, then it's easy to see why the north pole of 2 magnets would repel each other, and why the north pole of one magnet would attract the south pole of another magnet. What I can't understand is why the south pole of one magnet repels the south pole of another magnet. After all, if the magnetic field is flowing into the southern pole, shouldn't both southern pikes attract each other? To my warm-blooded mammalian mind, the fact that both southern poles repel each other implies that there is a secondary magnetic flow exiting said southern pole, and exiting magnetic flow that would logically cause them to repel each other. Is it possible that there is an additional opposing magnetic field exiting the South Pole and entering the North Pole, a magnetic field as yet undetected and unimagined by the rigid rhetorical hierarchy of skirtardemia? Asking for a friend, Roddy the Mammal. That's a great email.
We had to put the writing sound effect in there.
That's right. Because it always, the way he writes his emails, it sounds like he's sitting by the fire, composing.
That's great. Standard model skirp tardiness in my own mind is like, well,
That would cancel them each other out, right? That's what I thought.
yeah, but yeah, and I think that they have, I mean, that there's plenty of evidence for a flow.
Yeah.
And so, for some reason, opposites attract. But you're right. Like if you imagine it as a flow, it is kind of weird that the two things where the flow is going in shouldn't pull each other together.
Right. I think it's a field though, right? That's why it's more of a field than a flow. I guess there's a flow of electrons or something. I don't know what they're supposed to be. Is it supposed to be electrons or photons?
Holes. It's a flow of holes. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
That's a good question.
It is a good question. I don't know.
That's why I'm saying if you imagine it as a flow, it does make sense to think that the two negative poles would attract each other.
Yeah. Right. So is it actually a flow?
Yeah.
That's the question. I mean, because they call it a magnetic field, the description of how the field works is a flow of photons.
Right. I don't know.
Yeah.
I will think about this. And I don't know if I'll come to any conclusions.
Yeah. Tell your friend that we don't know. But it's a great question and email. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. This one's really long. I may need to save this one for another episode. I'll just do that. Save it. Okay, this is from Ian. He says, "Hey, my bros. Haven't dropped you a mail in a while. Hope life is treating you well. Just cracked a beer and loving the latest Uncharted X video on the origins of the Sphinx. I'm sure it's well and truly on your radar, but it's freaking awesome." And yes, he does make, I mean, Ben always makes fantastic, top-notch work. And I haven't been able to go through the whole thing yet, but I listened to about half of it. But I need to finish it. He also says, "Really enjoying the deep dive into Laird's book. As ever with your podcast, it's a real highlight of my week. I've been digging Brian Forster's work as of late. So much of it, he's such a dude. How about getting him on the show? Reckon he'd be a great fit. Warm and fuzzies. Peace."
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Yeah, we need to get Brian Forster on the show, and we're supposed to do something soon with Ben too. And I feel really bad because Ben kept telling us, "Man, if you guys go do somewhere and do something, let me know." And I completely forgot to tell him that we were going on this trip. And like he messaged me today, he was like, "Hey man, looks like you had a great time on that trip that you totally didn't tell me about." I'm like, "Damn it, I'm sorry, dude. I completely forgot." So, yeah. Sorry about that, Ben.
Sorry about that. We didn't know we were going on the trip either. That
I know.
was the problem.
That's what I told him. I was like, dude, it was such short notice. We practically found out a few days before we had to go. So it was just, yeah, bad timing on all around. Okay. This one is from, let's see, Dennis.
I don't want to make the joke.
Right, I thought the same thing. He's a man, okay?
Okay.
Hi, Russ and Kyle. I got a burning question that I don't believe can be answered by archaeo evidence per se, but more intelligent speculation is needed, hence this correspondence. Why did so many ancient civilizations and peoples spend inordinate amounts of time and effort to dig out the huge underground structures in Turkey and India and Egypt and Lebanon, Kenya, USA, West, Mexico, Peru, and Bolivia? Everywhere in the world, these super ancient, masterfully carved out to precision in some cases exist. Include all that ancient with modern day examples. Every first world country on today has, usually, military structures, bases, and complexes underground. I believe, as yourselves believe, as well as Graham and Ben Davidson and Randall and Velikovsky, to name a few, I hold in highest respect that there was a catastrophe 10,800 years ago. Most likely a fragmentary comet or comets from the torrid stream. This event might have been one of many over the last 25,000 years or so. These unbelievable events were witnessed, endured, survived by humans, a species with amnesia. If by memory of few or those that had ability to navigate the world's oceans to reteach the ways to survive. Are the caves and underground structures to take refuge if we see the next cataclysmic event, to house humans until it is safe to come out, to above ground again? Although that is the only conclusion I've reached, it was for safety and protection from above. Given that, how can caves underground provide any protection from what's happening above? If almost every cataclysmic event imaginable involves water, floods, massive tsunamis, oceans leave their basins, would not taking refuge underground design your own drowning death? Would be underground underwater blender of carnage. Yes. Makes no sense. None. But yet, there they are. I don't get it, guys. What am I missing? Thanks so much for thinking about and answering. Snacks from Dennis. Also, by the way, P.S. Kyle, love the bumper tunes and melodies. When's the next album coming out?
Ooh, that's a greater mystery than the previous.
Harder question to answer than the first one.
Yeah, I don't know when it's coming out. We're working on it every weekend, every chance we get. Still got a lot of work to do. That's all I know.
That's right.
But yeah. When we start getting close, when we get out of the recording studio and start doing the mixing and stuff, you guys will know about it. But right now we're still tracking.
That's right.
So hard to tell.
Yeah.
But to the previous subject, when we were on the trip, we were talking about the Native American legends of the ant people.
Yeah.
And one of the things I was thinking was, imagining an advanced civilization coming to the Americas and doing some mining with all kinds of tools and things that maybe the native peoples didn't recognize. If they come across some people doing a mining operation, they might look to be like ants, right? They're going down in this hole. They keep going down in the hole, and then they're coming out of the hole with stuff. And there's a big funnel of tailings.
Yeah.
And that's what the natives are seeing these people like perhaps
coming in and out of a hole.
Perhaps the advanced civilization is not wanting to really mess with the natives. They're kind of keeping to themselves, and they're doing their mining. So the natives just end up calling them the ant people because they look to be doing the same thing that ants do.
Yeah.
Big long lines, like maybe they have a long trail or they built a road or something to take these goods to the coast. So, from a mountaintop or something, they can just see these little ants coming out of the hole, going off way off into the distance. And it's just like this long ant trail. And then perhaps the advanced civilization realizes that something bad is about to happen. So then they decide to make contact with the natives and say, hey, come down in this hole.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's cool. But to the question about flooding themselves into the caves, sure, I think that happened, right? There's on Malta.
Yeah. The Hypogeum seems like that's
the blender room or whatever. Yeah. Seems like that happened.
Yeah.
But it would protect you from fire from the sky, right?
And earthquakes would be an issue if you're underground, right? So you try to build in very stable rock, or in places that don't have faults.
Yep.
But it's a gamble.
It's a gamble. But
it's a good gamble because you have a pretty good idea that a lot of places on the surface are going to be impossible to live.
Yeah.
It's either going to be incredibly hot or you're going to have fire from the sky, or then it's going to be nuclear winter, incredibly cold, or it's going to be torrential rains for months So going underground is a good gamble, because nowhere else on the surface is going to be safe at all.
Yeah. The other thing you can do is dig an entrance that goes way down deep
Oh yeah, make a trap.
and then comes up into all of the multiple rooms and passageways and everything. And then, you might drill air holes going to the surface at a higher elevation somewhere. Which that type of thing is been done.
Yeah, it's found in
Darren Q
Cappadocia,
or something like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, the main entrance would be sealed off, but if water penetrated in through the air holes or the air shafts or whatever, it would just run down to the very bottom that you dug out.
Yeah.
And that would be your well
Yeah.
where you get water. But yeah, if the ocean ran over top of you, you're done.
Yeah.
Yeah. So hopefully that doesn't happen.
Right.
And maybe that did happen. And of course, since the oceans are 400 feet higher, we wouldn't find those.
Right.
The ones we find are above the ocean level.
Yeah.
So
So it's like they were running to higher ground
yeah.
to dig them, and now some of them are still in higher ground, but not as much as they were.
Right.
If they were dug at those times. But yeah, if you look at the stories of Ahura Mazda and Yima, and the Varas, he was not worried about water. He was saying that there was going to be fire and ice. So
Yeah.
and they basically had to survive a brief period of fire from the sky and then a long period of ice. And they lived underground for generations to survive
Yeah.
that.
So the ones that were too low in elevation, they're underwater.
That's right.
So we don't even know that they're there.
Yeah, they failed, or probably failed. Maybe there's somebody still down in there if they sealed it really well,
Where do they get in the air, though?
making it from the water
High
if they
tech.
had high tech. Yeah.
Good questions.
Good questions. I think we've pondered this question ourselves too. Like, what would be the purpose of an underground base? Well, in the end, my conclusion was it's a better bet than anything else except going to space.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
I think if
you could go to space and dig a tunnel. Right. That would be better.
yeah,
Kind of like the
Wormholes.
Watcher. Yeah, he's got a bunker deep under his space station.
That's right.
It's the safest thing you can do.
That's right. But you see disaster movies and they have the same thing. And when I read recently Neil Stephenson's Seven Eves, and they tried all three things. Some people there was a huge effort to get as much people and materials into orbit around the Earth as possible. Then there was also an enormous effort to get as much people underground, deep underground on the Earth as possible. And then there was also an enormous effort to get as many people deep in the oceans as possible. As the three places of course, everybody thought that in space was the best bet to survive. Maybe, if you could last long enough in space, right? Because if you have if you think about it, if you have an enormous effort to build a whole bunch of stuff and throw a whole bunch of things up into space, well, everything up there, once you're up there, that's all you got.
Yeah.
Unless
you're going to some other body like the moon or
right,
Mars or something.
which means you need to have a bunch of fuel.
Right. Yeah.
So your choices are launch more people or launch more fuel, right? Because it's all about weight.
Yeah.
It's all a matter of weight ratios. Okay.
It would be pretty dangerous to be in the water too. I mean, if you were deep underwater, a shock wave from an impact in that high pressure situation would just, easily crush anything.
That's right. So if you had the ability to get down in a trench where you're basically protected by canyon walls,
yeah, but the shock wave is going to go
knock a bunch of boulders off the trench walls.
Well, not only that, but as it passes over the trench, it'll send a surge down into the trench too.
But it's still protected. Like you could hide in a canyon from an explosion shock wave.
Yeah.
Because it'll mostly pass over it.
Yeah.
Right. But yeah, every scenario has its dangers.
Yeah.
And in the Seven Eves, well, I shouldn't give spoilers. Read the book; it's really good. Seven Eves. Okay.
What? Spoilers.
Spoilers on the book.
Oh, okay.
I don't want to give spoilers for people who haven't read it.
All right, fine.
Because it's fairly new, right?
Okay,
if it was
okay.
an old science fiction, it would be one thing.
Okay.
Like when I'm telling science fiction stories, they're usually like Heinlein, they came out 40 or 50 years ago. But this one is,
Fine.
yeah. Sorry. Great book. It's on audio. You can get it.
Fine. I think we got to take a break.
Okay.
Fine. And welcome back to Brothers of the Serpent podcast, the coolest book club you've ever been in. Also, the Snake Bros Institute for Advanced Copperlight Studies, where there are no degrees, only certificates of ignorance, which you have to print yourself on every subject. So, hard to do.
That's right.
Still working on it.
And you're listening to the Smooth Sounds of Arabia.
That's right.
Name of the song. This is a funky bumper song.
Still a work in progress,
Yeah,
as
work in
are
progress.
all the bumper songs.
Permanent works in progress.
That's right. And kicking off part 3 of the Velikovsky Heresies by Laird Scranton.
That's right. I want to say once again, thanks to Intertraditions and to Laird for allowing us to do this.
Yes.
So help us.
Help them by
help
helping
them,
yourself.
helping, by
to
help us
them.
all. By supporting them, by buying the book. I know many of you already have.
Thank you so much
have been,
for that.
That's right. Some of you have been posting the pictures of your newly arrived, freshly minted Velikovsky Heresies books in the Discord. But yeah, anybody who hasn't gotten it yet, you should. I'm reading quite a bit of material from it, but I can't obviously read it all. I wouldn't do that. And it's really important for us to be able to continue doing this with Intertraditions books, that we prove that our model here works, and that that you guys get interested in the book and you go purchase it, because that's what they told me. They were like, our whole purpose in allowing excerpts to be used is to entice people to come to their favorite bookstore. So help us out, buy the books. Thank you guys so much.
And without further ado, I must open my Wolf Hollow Brewing Company Pulpit Supply, an American brown ale.
Oh, yeah.
As is my tradition when I have Pulpit Supply from the Brewcaster. Thank you, sir.
Wolf Hollow Brewing. Let me try it.
Fantastic.
Maybe give it a shot.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
Oh, yeah. That is good. One more thing, though. Let's go back to Roddy the Mammal's question. I was thinking about this during the break, and Kyle was like, we kind of shortchanged him on an answer. But the reason is because we don't know. But, I mean, I do kind of have an idea that, yeah, if there's, if the flow is going in on both sides, that might create a suction. But it's also, you can look at it as those flows are actually going in the opposite direction of each other. It's not a suction. They're just flowing in the wrong direction. You can't push those flows together, because if you push them together, one is pulling one way and the other's pulling the other way. So they don't want to do that. You see what I'm saying? They pull against each other, even though it's an inward pull rather than an outward push. Because what you have to look at it as a flow of photons or electrons or whatever it is that's doing it.
Because if they're going into if you take a bar magnet,
Yeah.
and if you imagine at the center of the end of the bar magnet, there's this flow going in, and the other flow is going in. There's a curve way out where the magnetic field is.
Yeah, and you can feel that curve when you move two bar magnets around each other. You can sort of feel where the curve is. And the reason you can't push them together is because doing that is trying to jam two flows that are going in the opposite direction of each other into each other.
Yep.
So it isn't a suction, it's a flow. You see what I mean?
And what happens when you put two magnets together is that the entire flow becomes one flow.
That's right.
So if you have the flow coming out of one end of a bar magnet and a flow going in to the other of the other bar magnet, you put them together, they no longer come out of that one end and going into the end of the other one, but they become
One
a
magnet.
continuous flow all the way through both magnets, out the other end, and all the way back and into the end of the first magnet.
Right.
So it becomes a continuous loop. So if you try to imagine,
So basically, sticking two same side ends together would have to completely reverse the flow of one magnet, and it can't do that. That's another way to put it.
yeah, like take two vacuum cleaners and put the hoses together, right? Yeah, they pull each other towards each other, but then as soon as they completely close up, it stops the flow.
Yeah.
You can't do that with magnets.
That's right.
You can't stop the flow.
Can't stop the flow.
Instead, you have to think of it like you want to make continuous flow, and you're just adding another tube to the end of the vacuum cleaner.
That's right. Yeah. All right.
So sort of an answer for you.
Okay. So as is also tradition, along with the Wolf Hollow Brewing Company beers, I usually will go into the Discord and ask for questions or comments or trolling before these.
Fantastic sods.
Yeah, before the book episodes. So on this one, I got a whole string of questions from LP, and I think these are questions for Velikovsky. So what we're reading is, Laird talking about Velikovsky, but they're good questions. He says, does Velikovsky describe how the Earth would have been different in the ancient past relative to the cosmos? Were our seasons and precession born of the Venus birth? Does Velikovsky only describe what's happened in the past, or does he offer a worldview that would allow for pre-knowledge? Does he make room for Noah and others always having foreknowledge in the legends? Does he offer anything that will allow us to better guess when our planet will be in upheaval? Does he offer any evidence as to how people in the ancient past were giants? Does his argument allow for inner Earth beings, and why not? And how much mud does he think we're dealing with? The mud jokes. I don't know. I don't know if he talks about foreknowledge. And in some ways, it seems like Velikovsky's catastrophes are one-offs, right? They're not cyclical. I mean, the Venus thing being generated from Jupiter is not necessarily cyclical, but possibly with new standard model ideas. Well, I'm sorry, not standard model yet, but new ideas on planetary formation based on exoplanet systems that we've been looking at. And that so many of these systems are either binary stars or a star with a gas giant, and they're in various stages. But basically, when you see smaller planets in any kind of system, they're always there in the context of at least one enormous gas giant. So you can almost view that system as being a binary system, but the other star is just not big enough, so it's a gas giant. And it's possible that all the other smaller rocky worlds and all the comets and asteroids and everything else in any given system are generated out of that original system of the gas giant and the star.
That's really cool.
Yeah. So is it a cyclical thing? I don't know. So foreknowledge, I'm not sure, right? And how long did it take Venus, if this happened, how long would it take for the cataclysm to get here, for Venus to show up and actually do all the damage that it does, or for it to interact with Mars and Mars to show up and do all the damage that it does? I don't know. And I'm not sure that Velikovsky was talking about Noah's flood. I think because he was talking about the Exodus, which is later. So, right? Exodus is definitely after the flood, which was in Genesis.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if there was a flood catastrophe with Noah, that was before all of this stuff that we've been talking about in Velikovsky's model. As for offering anything that will allow us to better guess when our planet will be in upheaval, I don't think so. But Velikovsky is I'm pretty sure this is right. Velikovsky is the origin of the idea of a species with amnesia. So, Basically, I mean, Graham Hancock has popularized it more, but Velikovsky was the first one to talk about it. He was a psychiatrist, remember that. So the idea of a collective amnesia is something that he was fascinated with.
Yeah.
And a collective trauma. Okay, good questions though. So to the book. The last thing we were talking about was the atmospheres of Saturn and Jupiter and how they're very dynamic and how the giant vortices, Great Red Spot included, are systems that aren't well understood because there are these massive jet streams that are easily visible. Those are the bands that are in the outer atmospheres of Saturn and Jupiter. But there are these, like the Great Red Spot is this huge storm that manages to survive the passage of these bands, right? These jet streams. And they're thinking that the modern scientific thinking is that the only way that can work is if those vortices actually extend all the way down to the core.
Yeah, they originate in the core somewhere.
Yeah, that it goes all the way down through the atmosphere and even down into the liquid part where it's high pressure and now the gas is all turned to liquid. It's still rotating down there, and that makes it
also
at the core.
Typically that type of thing can originate in the deepest parts, right? Like there's like think of a drain.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah.
It's draining and there's like this incredible turbulence down in the drain and that slowly works its way up.
Right, and results in this circular vortex on the surface. Yeah.
So you can disturb it with the surface, but it's the vortex is still going down at the deepest level. Mm-hmm. And then it will rebuild itself if it's disturbed on the surface too much.
Yeah. Okay, so another argument presented by Sagan against Velikovsky in regard to the ejection of Venus from Jupiter, which he expressed at the American Association for the Advancement of Science Symposium, is that from an astronomic perspective, any process which makes large objects makes more small objects. And I think we talked about this a little bit. It was also Velikovsky's view that the processes that he postulated to have created Venus from Jupiter actually did create a large number of additional smaller objects, including many of the short-period comets. In all, about 1,600 smaller bodies have been documented to share Jupiter's orbit. And Velikovsky cited studies by a leading Russian authority on comets, whose research revealed that a large number of short-period comets were losing mass at such a very high rate that they were calculated to completely disappear within 50 or 60 orbits. So they could not be of very great astronomic age. This suggested that objects such as Halley's Comet also could not have been created more than a few thousand years ago. In Velikovsky's view, the creation of many smaller bodies accompanied the ejection of Venus from Jupiter, and this result was supported, in Velikovsky's view, by the seemingly large number of comet sightings reported in ancient times as opposed to modern-day sightings. So in other words, there was a great number of apparent comet sightings, reported ones in ancient times, but as you go farther in time and get closer to the present, those sightings drop off and drop off and drop off. Like there was a moment of creation of a large number of objects. And then those were seen in the sky for a long period of time, but over time they slowly fell into the sun or disintegrated completely or whatever.
But what about the Oort cloud? I mean, is that still
it's totally theoretical?
Theoretical, yeah.
I'm not sure anybody's ever seen an Oort object. Kuiper belt objects are so distant that, but they've seen a few things out there, but it's just hypothesized that it's full of stuff. Okay, Chapter 8. Could Venus have made a close approach to Earth? According to the traditional scientific view, Venus and Earth formed at the same time, billions of years ago, and have since remained in their distinct, separate orbits, with no reasonable opportunity to have made a close encounter with one another. Perhaps the first point to be made regarding Venus and Earth is that Velikovsky critic Carl Sagan seems justified in his view in regard to the biblical long day of Joshua, that it would be unreasonable to think that any interaction between Venus and Earth could have at first greatly slowed the physical rotation of Earth and then somehow restarted it again, magically returning it to the same approximate original rotation speed. Velikovsky's answer to this complaint is that, from the standpoint of a person on Earth, a similar effect could have been accomplished through a gradual change in the tilt of the axis of Earth, an event that would have required no actual change in Earth's rotational speed at all, and which could also have had the effect of greatly elongating the day for some viewers. As the most obvious starting point for discussing new evidence that might pertain to this, it is now accepted, as we have previously mentioned, that there is an apparent rotational resonance that, for reasons unknown, exists between Venus and Earth. Through the auspices of this apparent resonance, Venus turns its same face to the Earth at every inferior conjunction. Some think that this resonance, which is typical of the kind that develops between astronomic bodies that have in fact approached each other, could be the remnant of a close encounter between Venus and Earth, such as Velikovsky suggests. Others have argued that it might indicate that Earth's gravitation exerts a subtle tug on Venus. However, this second proposition was rejected by many astronomers when it was calculated that the combined spin of the two planets was too rapid for such a subtle gravitational effect to actually work. So that the combined spin of both planets comes into effect when you're looking at a long-term, tiny tidal effect at every inferior conjunction of these two planets.
Yeah.
That even over their standard model billions of years for the age of the solar system, it couldn't do it. Not enough. Velikovsky claimed, as we again alluded to earlier, that as Venus passed nearby Earth, the two bodies influenced each other's rotation. As a consequence of this and of a proposed impact between Venus and Mars, Velikovsky predicted that Venus would be found to have an anomalous rotation. And later it was shown that Venus did, in fact, exhibit a very slow and retrograde rotation, meaning that it rotates in the opposite direction to Earth. Both of these facts could be interpreted to support Velikovsky's claim of a close encounter between Venus and Earth. Okay, skipping a bit here. And then perhaps the first bit of Velikovsky's predictive statements relating to the moon was that Earth would be found to have a magnetic field that extends as far as the moon. And the discovery of the magnetosphere by James Van Allen confirmed the existence of the magnetic field itself. Recent studies emphasize how far into space this field can actually stretch. A 2008 article in Science Daily magazine titled "Moon Gets a Lashing from Earth's Magnetotail" confirms Velikovsky's suggestion that this field must extend as far as the moon to have been a correct one. And there's a whole bunch of data here on that I'm not going to go through, but basically saying that Earth does have a magnetic tail. And we kind of talked about this, how the part away from the sun is being pushed outwards. Right. Similar to a comet, but it's the actual magnetic field of the Earth. So you can, with the right energies and power, shove magnetic fields around and make them flail, They call it lashing. The astronomers always describe it as, the magnetic tail of some planet or another is lashing this or that moon because it's flailing behind the planet from the direction of the sun.
That's cool.
Another of Velikovsky's early expectations regarding the moon relates to this same concept of magnetism and how it affects bodies of the solar system. Because the moon has no magnetic field of its own, none could have been present to affect the rocks at the time they are presumed to have formed billions of years ago, having cooled from molten lava. Consequently, the reasonable expectation of astronomers in the 1950s and 60s was that moon rocks would exhibit no magnetism. However, based on Velikovsky's proposed history for Venus and Mars, the moon would have been recently exposed to the magnetic fields of Mars and Venus and to high temperatures that would have caused widespread melting of the moon's surface. From Velikovsky's perspective, many of the moon rocks should exhibit some degree of remnant magnetism, and accordingly, one mystery that was raised initially by the moon rocks when they were returned by the Apollo astronauts was why they did indeed often show signs of remnant magnetism. Now, this confused me a little bit because neither Mars nor Venus are supposed to have a magnetic field. So what magnetic field is he talking about that the moon would have been subjected to. Maybe Venus had a magnetic field sooner after it came out of Jupiter and it's losing it.
I don't know.
The other question is, if the Earth's magnetic field extends far enough out into space to be in the moon, that could be where the remnant magnetism comes from on the moon rocks. The only thing you have to have is for the moon rocks at any given time when they're moving through the Earth's magnetic field to be molten so that they can form within that magnetic field.
So within any crater that recently happened, when the moon passes through the Earth's magneto tail, they would gain magnetism.
Right. So I'm not sure that's strong evidence there because, number one, Venus and Mars don't have very much of a magnetic field at all. So unless Velikovsky was saying there's something way different about them then, which is possible, and that it's possible that because the Earth's magnetic field extends all the way out to the moon, it could be the reason for the remnant magnetism of moon rocks. Okay. Other modern sources consider the issue of remnant magnetism on the moon to be an unsolved mystery. One NASA website mentions this issue, stating, though the moon has no internally generated magnetic field, areas of magnetism are preserved in the lunar crust, but how this occurred is a mystery. The early moon appears not to have had the right conditions to develop an internal dynamo, the mechanism for global magnetic fields for the terrestrial planets. So that's interesting too. I guess, I mean, they must know that the Earth's magnetic field extends out that far. Maybe it's just too weak to generate the remnant magnetism they see in the moon rocks.
Yeah.
But the Earth's magnetic field was also supposed to be much stronger at periods in the past, so maybe that's, I don't know. I have questions.
Lots of possibilities, yeah.
Okay. The inherent difficulties in trying to establish radiometric dates for rocks whose composition at the time of formation is not firmly known are outlined in a 2008 article by Mitsunobu Tatsumoto and Dr. Andrew A. Snelling and David E. Rush of the Department of Physics at the Indonesia University of Education. This article states, quote, if we know the amount of uranium and lead in a rock, can we tell how old it is? We can if we know how much uranium and lead were in the rock to begin with. Otherwise, we can make one of two assumptions. One, there was some lead in the rock when it was formed, or two, there wasn't any lead in the rock when it was formed. If we make the first assumption, then we have to figure out how much there was. Since scientists don't know what process formed the rock in the first place, we can't possibly know how much uranium and how much lead that process created. Therefore, the accuracy of the computed date depends entirely upon how well we guess the initial concentrations of uranium and lead. There is no more reason to believe that the rock initially contained 20% uranium and 80% lead than there is to believe that the rock initially contained 80% uranium and 20% lead. If you assume an initial concentration of each kind of material, the calculations will yield an age determined entirely by whatever wild guess you made. If we make the second assumption, the calculation will yield the oldest possible age. If one uses 3 different dating techniques on 2 different rocks from the same formation, it is quite possible that one will get 6 different dates. If one uses potassium argon and lead on the same rock, the potassium argon date will probably be millions of years, while the lead date will probably be billions of years. Geologists know this, so they never bother to do lead dating on recent lava flow, nor do they do potassium argon on ancient stone. Whenever a radioactive date calculation does not agree with the preconceived notion of how old the rock is, that date is declared discordant and is ignored.
Well, okay.
Unquote.
Can you explain some of that? Why would they not do lead on recent lava
Because
flow?
it gives you really, really old dates, and they know that.
Okay.
Every time.
Okay.
So they don't want really old dates on a recent lava flow, so they don't do that dating technique that gives you really old dates.
Okay.
Then the one that gives you young dates, they don't ever use it on the rock that's supposed to be really old.
The stuff they know is really old.
Yeah. And then at the very end, he says, you know, whatever whenever a radioactive date calculation does not agree with the preconceived notion of how old the rock is, that date is declared discordant and is discarded.
Okay. So it's only when their dating method lines up with their preconceived notions that
That's
they
right.
accept it.
He was trying to point. I included this because it's not necessarily pertinent to some of the stuff we're talking about. It's just that I included this because I'm like, yes, this is.
Yeah.
I've been fascinated with this issue since we started the podcast and before. That there are all these dating techniques, and a lot of them have all these hidden variables that people don't know about, but the scientists do. And a lot of those hidden variables are things you have to pick.
Yeah,
you have to choose there's some known starting point, and the only way you have a known starting point is by assumptions on formations or whatever else.
Right.
So you basically get to set up the variables to get the answer you want.
Yeah. Yep.
And this guy just laid it out. I think it was great. Not this guy. This is 3 scientists. Dr. Tatsumoto, Snelling, and Rush from the Department of Physics.
Yeah.
I remember I ranted like in episode 3 about the physicists. Like, they know these processes.
Yeah.
You know, so some geologist or archaeologist comes in and gives them something. The physicist gives them the date, and if the people argue, they're like, "Get out of my lab!" Like, this physical process is known to me. You know.
Yeah.
So what this guy is pointing out is like, yeah, we have to pick variables so you can get whatever number you think is correct. And I guess the biggest point in here is like he's saying, if we don't know how the rock formed to begin with, then we can't do these calculations. So this is a big problem with the moon, for example, because it isn't really clear how the moon formed. So they don't really know. So when they come home with a moon rock, you know, they don't have really good models on how the moon formed, so they don't really know what to think about how this stone formed.
Yeah.
So trying to date it is kind of up in the air because they just have to guess on levels of stuff, the variables at the beginning.
Right.
But the other way you could keep taking it farther and say, well, yeah, you don't actually know how the Earth formed either. But all of their dating methods on Earth rocks are based on strata. If it's at the bottom, it's probably the oldest, so use those dates. And the formation was by slow coalescing of gases in the nebula, and it happened so many billions of years ago. So they have all these preconceived notions that allow them to plug in numbers into their variables.
Right. And it's kind of the same with the carbon dating.
Yeah.
Like they're deciding that the decay rate is constant and that the influx has been constant.
That's the big one with carbon dating. Is it's cosmogenically generated, so the assumption is that there's a constant influx.
Right.
And of course, tree ring and ice cores and other things have recently shown that there's a problem with that. So now you have calibrated carbon-14 dates.
Typically 2,000 years off when you're talking about 12,000 years ago.
Right. Right. But you go back so far and you run out of tree rings.
Right.
And then you can't calibrate your dates anymore.
Right.
Now, with carbon-14, you can't go back much farther than that because it doesn't date stuff that old in the first place. 60,000-ish years is, you're running out of carbon-14 because its decay is high. But another thing to keep in mind with these things is the higher the supposed decay rate of any given radioactive thing, in other words, the faster it decays, the more tight the dates can get, right? So something that decays really quickly, like carbon-14, relatively quickly, you can date things in a short range. You can't go back very far,
but you can get pretty accurate.
But you can get much more accurate dates and in a recent time.
Yeah.
But for something that has a really long half-life, your error margins are millions of years, and your dating is probably going to be looking at stuff that old in the first place. So I think all of those things are very important. And then there's a big difference between dating something with cosmogenically generated materials, meaning stuff that is made by cosmic rays, which is dependent on the influx of cosmic rays, like you said.
Yeah.
And then dating based on just purely radioactive materials that form in the stuff as it forms, which is what he's talking about.
Yeah.
Lead and uranium. And lead and potassium argon, these things that are basically chemically included into the stone at the time of its formation, at the time of its solidification or lithification. So once that uranium and lead and potassium and argon is solidified into that stone when it cools into something hard, then any changes taking place after that are due to decay of various things, but you have to guess at how much of what and what was in what at the time of formation.
That's impossible.
Right. It is.
It's impossible to guess correctly.
That's right.
I mean, you might guess correctly, but you would never know.
Right. You would not know that was the right guess. And that's what he said. So what they end up doing is don't use that kind of dating on this rock because we think it's young.
Yeah.
Don't use, and sometimes it's because we know it's young because this is just formed lava. But what would happen if you did a lead dating on recently formed lava? You'd get some ridiculous number that like it was 1 billion years old, which they know is wrong because they watched it form because it's a lava flow from a volcano that just went off like a decade ago, right? And yet they'll go and use that same lead dating on something that they think is really old that's deep and then accept the number, even though it'll give them a false number on young rocks, and they know that.
It's crazy.
Right? It's just, I don't know.
I don't like it.
I want to be mad about it, but at the same time, I understand because
That's all you got.
what else are you going to do? Yeah.
I'll be mad about it.
You keep pointing it out to me. You're like, well, this is what we've got.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm like, yeah, but that allows them to, hold up their model. And I don't know. Anyway, I can rant about that some other time. Okay.
And we're out of time.
Snacks! And you're listening to the Master Sounds from Dozer Dan Bassman and Kyle bringing the funk on Brothers of the Serpent podcast, where we are going through Velikovsky Heresies by Laird Scranton. And glad to have you all back with us. Glad to be back in the Tangent Cube.
Yes,
Glad to have the Watcher here. And glad to have the funk.
Glad to have some dampening in the room.
That's right. The road sode was a little echoey, but it's okay as a road sode.
Yep.
That's what you expect. Okay. Back to the book here, The Velikovsky Heresies by Laird Scranton. He says, other researchers report an excess of noble gas atoms in the outer layers of lunar rocks, such as Velikovsky suggested might have been acquired from a close approach of Mars, whose presence and method of distribution is not well understood. So Velikovsky suggested that there might be noble gas atoms in the rocks in the lunar rocks caused by the close approach of Mars. And what Laird is saying is that those have been found and their method of distribution is not understood. But Velikovsky suggested they might be there, first of all, and that they might be caused by close approach.
All right. So could any of or all of these things be caused by the close approach of a comet to the moon?
Yeah, I think so.
So it doesn't necessarily have to be Venus.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Venus was supposed to have...
Magnetism, these noble gases, other elements that don't make sense.
Yeah. But so this is the key, I think, because at this point I've gone through the entire book now and marked everything. Right. So now I've gotten all the way to the end and I'm remembering some stuff. But I think the key is that in this model, it's possible that cometary bodies originate from the gas giants in the first place.
Okay, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's right. You were
so
correct.
so if Venus was a cometary body, then as it was just an enormous one that eventually planetized. Right? So, yeah. But this is actually a close approach of Mars.
I mean, it is. I can imagine, like, we have these volcanic eruptions on Earth that shoot materials up into the stratosphere, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Now you have this gas giant like Jupiter, this incredibly, unimaginably massive thing, and that unknown, powerful storms and things going on down there, and some kind of equivalent of a Jupiter type of Krakatoa event or something,
Yeah.
just blowing the top off of some incredibly dense
Yeah.
something in the core and it just flying out into the stratosphere and being the size of a giant comet, basically.
Yeah.
Or at least one large piece of the many billions of small pieces that come out.
Yeah. And remember, the Great Red Spot is, at least on the surface part that we can see of Jupiter, is the size of, you could fit 3 Earths down into it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is big enough to throw large pieces of things out into space. Okay. So these, let's see. So these researchers write, analysis of noble gases in the first lunar materials returned from the moon showed noble gas atoms are extremely abundant in lunar soils and led to a variety of conclusions relating to the source of the gases and the mechanisms controlling their subsequent distribution. Based on etching experiments and analysis of various grain size fractions, gases were found to reside near the surface of grains, mostly in the outermost few tenths of a micron. So not only are they abundant, but they're on the outsides of even the smallest grains.
Like they accreted there or something?
Yeah, like they were injected, just into the outside of the stone. So even if it seems that the age of the moon rocks cannot be used definitively to help confirm or deny Velikovsky's thesis, there are other interesting features called rills. I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly, which are long, sinuous ridges or valleys, whose existence on the moon has been difficult to explain without evoking another specific aspect of his scenario. In this case, Velikovsky's presumption that great electrical discharges occurred between bodies at the time of the close approach to Earth of Venus and Mars. So one article states, the surface of the moon is replete with long channels or grooves that continue to create unsolved puzzles and contradictions for geologists. Every traditional theory, when tested against the photographic evidence, has failed. One explanation of Hadley and other lunar rills has yet to be considered by planetary scientists. It is the one explanation that does not produce contradictions or conflict in any way with what we see on the moon. Engineer Ralph Jurgens, who investigated a new approach to sinuous rills, suggested in 1974 that they are the effects of electrical discharge. Jurgens' work, or maybe it's Jurgens' work, in turn, helped to inspire the lifelong explorations of today's leading electrical theorist, Wallace Thornhill, who has taken the investigation into new areas of research opened up by more recent explorations of our planetary neighbors. Jurgens knew that an electrical discharge of the magnitude implied would require an approaching charged body, and not just a small rock, but another planet or moon. The electric field between anode and cathode, or positively and negatively charged bodies, must build to an intensity great enough to pull electrons from the cathode by sheer force, tearing electrons from non-conducting lunar crustal materials and in numbers sufficient to trigger an interplanetary discharge.
That's a good way to describe it. I like that.
Yeah. So it was Velikovsky's confirmed view that hydrocarbons, which he correctly hypothesized must constitute a part of the atmosphere of Jupiter, would have been carried in the cometary tail of Venus. As a consequence, he supposed that evidence of hydrocarbons would be found on the moon. And in 1970, Science magazine article titled Organic Compounds in Lunar Samples, Pyrolysis Products, Hydrocarbons, and Amino Acids appears to confirm this prediction. So they found all those things in moon rocks.
I thought they came from dinosaurs, man.
I know.
What?
Yeah, they call them organic compounds when they're found elsewhere. Here they're fossils. But hydrocarbons is the main thing. And yeah, does the presence of hydrocarbons on other astronomical bodies imply life? If hydrocarbons are...
That's the other weird thing, is that they don't know of any... There's no known natural process other than life that creates these specific types of molecules.
Yeah. Well, and actually, if I remember, because when I did a bunch of reading on this, and the idea is that life creates these really big, complicated organic molecules, really massive ones.
Yeah.
And then the life expires, and then geological processes, pressure and heat and time, crack those down into what we recognize as hydrocarbons now.
Right.
So yeah, is there a process that will build them up from simple elements rather than having to construct first enormous and organic molecules and then break them apart? This is the question of abiotic hydrocarbons.
Right.
And I think that the answer is yes, because we see hydrocarbons in other places. Or the other possibility is that those places have life that's building giant, complicated organic molecules that are then being cracked down by other processes. So,
yeah, I think the main, well, I don't want to get off on too big of a tangent, but the main part of it is the hydroxyl group or something, or whatever it's called.
Yeah.
And that is the key, because it builds, you can build all these complicated structures with it.
Yeah.
But getting that fundamental group is the thing that they don't know of any other process other than life that could do it.
Yeah, maybe that's right.
I don't know. I could be all wrong on that, but I'll look it up.
Yeah, I'm just saying in general, they think that hydrocarbons, at least on Earth, are cracked down from more complex organic molecules. Which is part of what, which is part of what makes them non-renewable in that sense. But if they're abiotically created by deeper processes within the Earth, they may be a renewable resource.
Yeah.
Okay. Velikovsky suggested that at least some of the many craters of the moon would be found to be the product of bursting of bubbles of lava. A 2010 report by Southern California Public Radio on findings by the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, titled "New Findings Show Moon's Geologic Past More Complicated Than Previously Thought," supports this possibility. Quote, "Some of the data comes from the Diviner Lunar Radiometer experiment on board the orbiter. It makes infrared maps of the lunar surface and studies those maps to detect various minerals. 3 UCLA scientists have examined the Diviner data, and they say it reveals geologic structures on the moon linked with volcanic activity. There are steep slopes and rough surfaces that suggest lava bubbles. They bubbled up and bulged out on the surface. And the Diviner's reading of materials blasted out of craters also suggests that in some places lava pooled and cooled beneath the surface. What it all means is that lunar geology is far more complex than researchers had thought."
Yeah.
So again, you have this, Velikovsky suggests that some of the craters on the moon are burst lava bubbles. A bubble comes up and then it basically bursts, or it hardens and then crumbles and then leaves this crater-like formation. And then later, some, new science finds similar things, but they don't talk about it in the same way, but it's basically saying the same thing. That, yeah, okay, so some of those craters are burst lava bubbles.
Wow.
Chapter 9. Could Venus have impacted Mars? Another of the bold predictions made by Velikovsky in Worlds in Collision, based on what he saw as the corroborating evidence of world mythologies, was that Mars had suffered a direct impact from the comet Venus, a collision that, in Velikovsky's view, had occurred sometime prior to 757 BCE and put Mars on its own path of destructive interludes with Earth. Again, this predictive statement, which was given by Velikovsky in 1950, ran counter to the conventional wisdom of the day, and it was made largely on the testimony of ancient world mythologies and without the benefit of much supporting scientific evidence. However, in the 1970s, when the Viking space probes began to reach Mars, a picture of the planet began to emerge that largely supported Velikovsky's view. 20 years later, the Mars Global Surveyor probe showed that the crust of Mars is much thicker in the southern hemisphere of the planet than in the northern hemisphere. It also revealed differences in the magnetic properties of the northern and southern hemispheres of Mars. So not only is the crust much thicker on one hemisphere than the other, but both of those hemispheres have much different magnetic properties as well.
You think that's due to like one side of it have been recently molten, so it's got a thinner crust?
Like it's actually a hemisphere-sized crater wall.
Oh my god! Jeez.
That Mars lost a kilometer of material on one of its sides.
Oh man! Wow.
So it was suggested that these characteristics might relate to an internal process within the planet, or could possibly be interpreted as as surviving evidence of one or more ancient impacts. In 2008, a study at the California Institute of Technology by Margarita Marinova, then a graduate student in Caltech's Division of Geological and Planetary Sciences, confirmed that Velikovsky's proposed planetary impact scenario could make sense in terms of the types of damage that had been observed to exist on Mars. It is important to note that after many trials based on widely varying parameters, the scenario favored by the researchers attributed the impact to a body much smaller than Venus and assigned it to an epoch much earlier than Velikovsky proposes. So one of their press releases states, scientists at the California Institute of Technology have shown through computer modeling that the Mars dichotomy, as the divided terrain has been termed, can indeed be explained by one giant impact early in the planet's history. This size range of impacts only occurred early in solar system history, and the team modeled a range of projectile parameters that could yield a cavity the size and ellipticity of the Mars lowlands without melting the whole planet or making a crater rim. After cranking 500 simulations, combining various energies, velocities, and impact angles through the GPS division's Beowulf-class computer cluster, the researchers narrowed in on a sweet spot, a range of single impact parameters that would make exactly the type of crater found on Mars. The favored simulation conditions outlined by the sweet spot suggest an impact energy of around 10 to the 29th joules, which is equivalent to 100 billion gigatons of TNT. The impactor would have hit Mars at an angle between 30 and 60 degrees while traveling at 6 to 10 kilometers per second. By combining these factors, Marinova calculated that the projectile was roughly 1,600 to 2,700 kilometers across. So this statement makes clear that the tentative dating of the impact was not based on any actual physical evidence, but rather on the traditional scientific view that our solar system has long been a place of tranquility, and the assumption that, therefore, any major upheaval within the solar system must have happened millions or billions of years ago. The Caltech announcement does not say whether any simulations were run based on a possible impact with a body the size of Venus, or whether any of them might have produced results similar to what is seen on Mars. So I think what he's pointing out there is, number one, this feature of Mars, at least in terms of standard model stuff, is thought of as a possible cause from a giant impact. Right?
Yeah.
That even standard model Caltech people are looking at this possibility. And then they ran all these simulations through their supercomputer to figure out what was the sweet spot. But those parameters are, again, this goes back to the dating issue. Those they've got all these variables.
And they're using all the standard model ideas to...
Yeah. And also planet formation, they don't really,
Yeah.
So, but this study is interesting because they're looking at this possibility. And the other thing Laird is pointing out here is that the age of the impact is only based on their standard model preconceptions about the solar system itself, and not any actual data that they came up with, or even something that can't happen in their model.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say too, is that they don't have a problem with most of these ideas, except that they're just too recent.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Another source commented on the importance of the impact model for understanding the history of Mars. This impact is really one of the defining events in Mars history, said MIT postdoctoral researcher Jeffrey Andrews Hanna, who led the new study with the MIT geophysicist Maria Zuber and NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory researcher Bruce Bannert. By combining detailed topographical data from the Mars Global Surveyor mission with measurements of the variations in the planet's gravitational field made by the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter satellite, Andrews Hanna and his team assembled a map of the Martian surface before volcanic eruptions added layers and obscured the boundary between the hemispheres. The map revealed a stunning elliptical basin shape covering about 40% of Mars's surface. This was a kind of surprising result, Andrews said. What we noticed is that the dichotomy boundary around the planet was actually smooth and regular. We tested to see if we could fit this with any shape, and it just so happens that it's almost perfectly fitted by an ellipse. There's only one process known to make an elliptical depression like that, and that's one giant impact.
That's pretty cool.
So imagine meteor crater, and then make it cover half the Earth. And then let a bunch
Pacific
of
Ocean.
Yeah, and then let a bunch of volcanoes run into it and everything. Yeah, you basically have the Pacific Ocean. Yeah, it's a giant hole in the side of the planet. But then if you like Mars, you suck all the water out of the planet, then you just have this huge hole.
Isn't the crust really thin in the Pacific?
Yeah,
Through that?
down at the bottom of the trench is some of the thinnest crust. Yeah, 9 miles maybe. Maybe it's more than that. I can't remember. It's not very thick there. So, in Worlds in Collision, Velikovsky commented on one of the specific forms that carbon would likely be found to take on Mars. He says, "The white precipitated masses on Mars which form the polar caps are probably of the nature of carbon, having been acquired from the trailing part of Venus." And data from the 1976 Viking landers were used to determine that, quote, "The atmospheric pressure on Mars changes seasonally because the temperature is cold enough that some of the carbon dioxide freezes during the winter and snows onto the polar cap."
Dry ice.
That's right.
On the polar caps.
While we've discussed how evidence on Mars supports Velikovsky's notion that Venus and Mars suffered a major impact with each other, there is also recent evidence that Venus may well have also been involved in just such a collision. A 2008 article in USA Today under the headline, "Venus Mysteries Blamed on Colossal Collision," states, in a new paper in Earth and Planetary Science Letters, John Hugh Davies from Cardiff University postulates that a giant impact in the late stages of planet formation is responsible for Venus's hot and dry climate. The impact would have been between two planet-sized objects, not dissimilar to the impact believed to be responsible for the formation of the Earth's moon. That latter giant impact, now accepted as the standard model for the origin of the moon, was off-center and resulted in a disk around the proto-Earth and gave the Earth a rapid spin. Davies' model would have a near-central impact that would leave Venus with virtually no rotation and vaporize any water it might have had at that point. So, I think that, it's interesting that he's pointing this out, but I think what this guy is trying to do is explain Venus's other anomalies by postulating a giant impact. In other words, he's not saying that there's crater evidence for a giant impact on Venus. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
He's just looking at Venus is upside down and spinning the wrong way, has a really long day, and has no apparent water, and it's incredibly hot. And he was like, well, maybe it ran into something really big a long time ago.
Right.
Whereas Mars actually has a huge hole in it. So, Chapter 10. Could Mars have made a close approach to Earth? Velikovsky blames the direct impact of Venus with Mars for having placed the planet Mars on its own collision course with Earth, sometime in the first millennium BCE. Although the sequence in which Velikovsky presents his chronology in Worlds in Collision suggests that the Venus-Mars impact happened after the close approach of Venus to Earth, the lingering rotational resonance that seems to exist between Earth and Venus argues that if this collision actually occurred, it must have happened sometime before Venus encountered Earth. So it is Velikovsky's claim that during the final millennium BCE, Mars made repeated close encounters with Earth. Carl Sagan famously calculated the probability of the several close encounters postulated by Velikovsky between Earth, Venus, and Mars at 1 in 10 to the 23rd power. This figure, which was widely quoted in the press as an overwhelming statistic against Velikovsky's view, was based on the assumption that each encounter should be treated as an independent event. However, Velikovsky quickly pointed out, and was later affirmed by Robert Jastrow, the founder and director of NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies, that the laws of gravity in fact dictate that one such encounter greatly enhances the probability of additional encounters. So Velikovsky cites many disastrous effects that the encounter with Mars ostensibly ravaged on Earth, but the most obvious and perhaps most verifiable of these would be his claim that it lengthened the solar year, extending the widely observed ancient 360-day year to our current 365-day year.
That makes so much sense. Like the entire system of numbers and measurement and all that being 360.
Yeah. And so before the part right before this is, Carl Sagan is making this this calculation of probability, but it's based on every single one of those encounters being a separate event. And so you calculate its probability separately, and then you calculate the probability of all those things happening together, and you get this enormous number. Yeah. But Velikovsky's like, no, man, like gravity, once you have one of them, they keep doing it.
Yeah.
And he was supported on that by the founder and director of NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies. That guy was like, yeah, he's kind of right about that part. Sagan.
Yeah.
What's wrong with you, man?
The first encounter is extremely improbable. But after that,
the encounters become very probable.
Yeah.
Yeah. So alongside a typical lunar calendar consisting of 12, 29, or 30-day months. Okay, there's going to be a lot of numbers in this part with the calendars. So I'll try to make it understandable. So 12, 29, or 30-day months, totaling 354 days, but extended to 355 in some calendars by the celebration of a New Year's Day, or with an additional intercalated day. Is that how you say that?
Sounds good.
It is well documented that many ancient cultures also honored a 360-day calendar that comprised 12 30-day months. Evidence for a 29-day month in Egypt is supported textually, which implies that Egypt also had a 354 or 355-day lunar calendar. Most modern researchers understand the 360-day calendar as having been for purely civic or ceremonial reasons that relate to religion and cosmology, not to any actual difference in the length of the solar year. The values that predominated in these ancient calendars center on the numbers 3, 5, 10, 12, 24, 30, 60, 360, and 2160, all of which are factors of the grand precessional cycle of 25,920 years. So, if knowledge about precession on the part of the ancient Egyptians can be presumed, then these calendars can be seen as deliberate approximations. Most Egyptologists believe that in order to align their 360-day ceremonial/civic calendar with the 365-day year, the Egyptians added 5 days to their 360-day ceremonial calendar. These extra days, which fall between the last day of one year and the first day of the next, are referred to as the days upon the year and were celebrated as the birthdays of 5 important Egyptian gods. Symbolically, these days were said to exist outside of any given year or month. And evidence for the addition of these days extends almost to the beginning of the Egyptian civilization, thousands of years before the date that Velikovsky proposes Mars encountered Earth. The 5-day difference between the 360-day ceremonial calendar and the 365-day solar calendar, along with the rationale for inserting extra days into the Egyptian calendar, was explained by way of a legend in which the master of time, Thoth, after creating the 360-day year, deceives Ra, or one version of the myth says the moon, into giving him 5 extra days, on which the goddess Nut can give birth to her children. Another version of the myth proposes that Thoth won 5 days from the moon, defined as 1/72nd of her days, in a game of draughts or cards. In both versions, the 5 extra days were added to the Egyptian year and are interpreted by Egyptologists to round out a 360-day year to 365 days. 5 days from the moon is defined as 1/72nd of her days. That's very interesting.
That's cool.
Yeah. The evidence for a 365-day year in Egypt begins with a tablet from the first dynasty that seems to indicate that the Egyptian year began with the annual heliacal rising of Sothis, or Sirius. This implies that by that early date, the ancient Egyptians used a solar calendar. The unspoken presumption on the part of the traditional Egyptologists is that this was a 365-day solar year, not Velikovsky's theorized 360-day year. Likewise, there are statements in Egyptian texts that the year consisted of 12 months plus the 5 added days. But again, these do not specify whether they refer to the 12 lunar months that add up to 354 or 355 days, or to the 12 ceremonial months that add up to 360 days. So do you see where he's going with this?
Yes. Like they add 5 days to an older lunar calendar, and
it gets 360 for the solar one.
Yeah, but the Egyptologists are just assuming that they added
adding
5 days to get 365.
Yeah. Both the solar and lunar calendars use the same month names. In other words, it is entirely possible, in accordance with Velikovsky's views, that the 5 days were originally meant to reconcile a 355-day lunar calendar with a 360-day solar calendar. In support of this view, we could refer to Sir E. A. Wallace Budge in his Egyptian Hieroglyphic Dictionary, whose entries state that one name for the epigomenal days was Rentp, the same pronunciation that Budge assigns to the festival of the new year and to the shared name of the festivals of both the solar year and the lunar year. In this way, the Egyptian hieroglyphic language suggests that these added days somehow bore a relationship to both the lunar and solar calendars. So, I think this is fascinating stuff. Like, it isn't clear, even in all the texts we've got, because the month names are the same in both the lunar and solar calendars. It's not clear which one, what exactly they're adding days to, but the assumption is obviously made that they must be adding days to the 360-day calendar. But they could be adding the days to the 355-day calendar.
Yeah.
I find that fascinating.
So Budge was willing to minutely shift his thinking.
That's right. Or he might say that he would not budge on the translation of that particular hieroglyph. If Velikovsky is right, then the suggestion is that there could have originally been 2 calendars in Egypt, the 355-day lunar calendar and the then 360-day solar calendar, which were reconciled to each other by the 5 intercalary days. After 757 BCE and the ostensible extension of the solar year, the 360-day calendar would have been reconciled to the new solar calendar by 5 intercalary days. In both cases, the difference represents days won from the moon, a reference to the fact that the lunar calendar is shorter than the solar one. And these are added to the lunar year in order to reconcile it with the solar year.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
What doesn't make sense is that
we're out of time.
No.
It doesn't make any sense. How did that
Now, let me get this thought out.
Yeah,
what doesn't make sense is that an advanced civilization that has very good astronomical science, right? They're developing astronomy and all this kind of stuff, would come up with a calendar that's religious based. Like, I mean, I don't know. It's annoying.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a ceremonial year. Yeah. No, they had an accurate lunar and solar calendar.
Exactly.
Yeah.
why would you assume that? It's like
If all of your ceremonies are based on the movements of astronomical bodies,
yeah, why would
you make a calendar that didn't relate to either to those astronomical bodies? That's a great point. Yeah, that's a really good point.
And it's because they already assume that all of the other amazing things they did were completely and totally devoted to some mythological stuff that they just made up.
Yeah.
That they're willing to say, well, yeah, their calendar was obviously ceremonial too.
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
It's annoying.
It is annoying.
And the Watcher has a lot of good stuff we'll have to get into on the next segment. So sorry about that. We had a glitch. It was a glitch. Snakes! And getting things wrong as usual here on Brothers of the Serpent podcast. Obviously, I don't know very much about hydrocarbons. We've been talking during the break with the Watcher, who is actually pretty good at chemistry, knows his stuff. I'm a noob. So I wanted to get you on here, Watcher, just for a minute to kind of give us a rundown on the strange properties of hydrocarbons.
Yeah, and hydroxyl is not the group that we were thinking
that's
of.
right.
It's something else. Yeah.
Yeah, so organic chemistry is entirely based around hydrocarbon compounds. You do have inorganic carbons that exist in, like calcium carbonate, right? Like limestone.
Yeah.
But carbon chains, when they form, are almost always going to be surrounded by hydrogens. And that makeup all on its own creates these spaces that are almost invitations or like catered specifically to different functional groups that'll attach to them. Like in an alcohol, you have an OH that attaches. In a amine, you have a nitrogen that comes in, and that's where you get nitrogenous compounds in DNA. But the only way that you see those form in most cases is either the buildup, the catabolic processes of digestion of other carbons like glucose into energy in animals, or the breakdown after they die and they're not living, but they turn into, let's say fossil fuels, if that's a thing. And so the carbon cycle is this buildup and breakdown process that is driven by living things. And you do not see organic carbon compounds anywhere really without there being a living something that runs through the cycle that builds them up and breaks them back down. You find inorganic carbon all over the place, but those compounds are formed differently. And so organic carbon is almost always a sign of some form of life.
Okay. Yeah, I guess as a layman, I've always found it interesting that we eat carbohydrates, but after we die, we are hydrocarbons. Going back
really
to
interesting things about that is that the reason that happens is the functional groups that come in and form the active biological compounds. Those don't happen when you decay. You're just carbon and hydrogen straight across the board. Carbon chains with a bunch of hydrogens around, which like your octanes, butanes, methanes, propanes.
Right.
Oh yeah.
Deadly stuff. But yeah, it's true, right, that there's not really a known process for abiotic hydrocarbons, right? I mean, they think that they exist, obviously, because they're looking out into outer space and seeing all these hydrocarbons and saying, well, that's obviously not because of life. So they accept that there's an abiotic process, but there's no known abiotic process. Is that true?
Right. At least at the time that I was in school taking chemistry courses, the general thought was that if they're forming abiotically, you have special instances of temperature and pressure that are affecting your reaction kinetics.
Okay.
Because at our standards of 1 atm and let's say 70 degrees Fahrenheit, it just doesn't happen easily. But if you had high pressure and different temperatures, that might be the most favorable reaction.
Like in the
so
core
it
of
has
the
to do
Earth.
with weird space pressure and temperature, maybe.
Space pressure.
Space pressure.
Well, you would know plenty about space pressure. Okay. All right. Well, this is the final segment of the final hour, ladies and gentlemen. And we should get back to this book. Otherwise, it's going to go to part 72.
Yeah. But thanks for that, Watcher.
Yeah,
that was
appreciate it.
good stuff. Yeah. Okay, so back to the book. So we're talking about calendar years. Or calendars, basically. Meanwhile, traditional claims for the existence of ancient Egyptian and Chinese solar calendars of 365 days also do not seem to be supported by explicit statements that cite 365 as the number of days in a year, but rather only by questionable inferences made by later researchers based on their belief that a solar year must consist of 365 days. For example, while the Daming calendar of China is purported to have produced a year of 365.24281481 days, none of the original calculations on the calendar on which the calendar was based have survived, and the calendar itself was not promoted until 504 CE by the inventor's son, long after Velikovsky's proposed change in the length of the year. Consequently, Velikovsky's belief in the existence of an ancient 360-day solar year remains theoretically possible. In the absence of explicit evidence for a 365-day year, either in Egypt or in some other ancient culture, we can at least say that there is a perspective from which Velikovsky's controversial proposition of an ancient 360-day year could make sense. If the ancient 360-day year in fact represented the true length of the solar year, then we would expect that many different ancient cultures shared the same year length, and they did, and that we would be able to document a widespread changeover to a 365-day year around the middle of the 8th century BCE, as Velikovsky claims. And such documentation can be found in the many calendar revisions that are said to have occurred at, or around, or just after 757 BCE. A modern-day reference for the history of calendars states, quote, "In the 8th century BCE, civilizations all over the world either discarded or modified their old 360-day calendars."
Oh, God. A bunch of people completely disconnected from each other.
Yeah.
All decided to do this at once.
That's right.
Because obviously that was the easiest thing to do.
And that's just what people do, right?
Yeah,
it's
that's
just a
right.
natural thing. It's like building dams for beavers.
That's right.
The 360-day calendars had been in use for the greater part of a millennium. In many places, month lengths immediately after that change were not fixed, but were based instead upon observation of the sky. Priest astronomers. I find that to be interesting. Is there an assumption being made there?
Yeah.
Were assigned the duty of declaring when a new month began, and it was usually said to have started at the first sighting of a new moon. Month length at that time was simply the number of days that had passed from one new lunar crescent to the next. During those years in Rome, for example, a pontifex, or a priest, observed the sky and announced the new moon, and therefore the new month, to the king. For centuries afterwards, Romans referred to the first day of each new month as calendae or calends, from their word calere, which is to announce solemnly or to call out.
Huh.
The word calendar derived from this custom. This practice of starting a month at the first sighting of a new moon was observed not only by Romans but by Celts and Germans in Europe and by Babylonians and Hebrews in the Levant. All of these peoples began their month when a young crescent was first seen in the sky, and this is still done for the Islamic calendar, but a new moon's date is calculated for traditional lunar calendars that are currently used in China and India. During the period when month lengths were not fixed, new moons were usually sighted after either 29 or 30 days. If clouds obscured vision on the 30th day, a new month was declared to have begun. When month lengths were identified with lunations, only those that lasted 30 days were considered to be normal. This was probably because all months had previously been 30 days for such a long period of time.
Wow.
So yeah, not only did they all change their calendars, but they went through this floating period of no one actually knows when the next month is. You know, and then the pontifex comes out and is like, "It is a new month, my lord." You know. For those who may not realize how very prevalent the 360-day year had been in the earliest ancient times, the following is a quick and admittedly incomplete survey of ancient cultures that are known to have observed such a calendar, and then later to have moved to a 365-day calendar. Assyria, the Aztecs, Babylon, Carthagena, Chaldea, China, Egypt, the Etruscans, the Greeks, the Hebrews, the Hindus, the Incas, the Maya, the Olmec, the Persians, the Phoenicians, the Romans, the Teutons, and the Tibetans. All of those people had a 360-day year for thousands of years and then suddenly moved. Well, I guess the Romans didn't have it for thousands of years, but they all had a 360-day year, and all around the same time they moved to a 365. And he says that's an incomplete list.
Yeah.
Given that we know with certainty that many of these cultures had long been careful observers of astronomy, capable of engineering large structures in stone in such a way that a specific star might rise above a stone marker on a given day, or the sunrise might highlight the interior of a chamber or cast a shadow on a stairway in some symbolic way on precisely the same day of every year, how are we to explain this seemingly global, synchronous impulse to make the self-same change in the reckoning of the year? Each culture adding 5 days to a previously long-standing 360-day year and or moving from a 30-day month to a new way of reckoning months, except as the consequence of some actual physical global effect.
Yes.
Can we seriously believe that after millennia of observation, the astronomers of these cultures suddenly all noticed at the very same moment that their 360-day year was 5 days too short?
No.
An uncorrected ancient 360-day calendar would have erroneously predicted summer to occur during the middle of winter after only 36 years. Surely, some bright astronomer priest, or perhaps some farmer whose livelihood depended upon the accuracy of a calendar, would have noticed this. Imagine that from a distance, you are watching a crowd of people walking down a busy street in New York City, and suddenly, without warning, they all duck to the left at the same moment. You don't have to actually see the object that caused them to all duck in order to conclude with assurance that the people in the crowd must have perceived that there was an object.
It was a ceremony.
That is very much what seems to be the case with calendars in 757 BCE. Their near simultaneous revision would seem to be a reaction to a single, common, tangible impulse.
Yep. All that stargazing for all those thousands of years by all those different cultures was just ceremony.
Yeah.
Until at some point they all decided that they should actually do science.
Right.
Don't you know that it helped them farm, right?
Yeah.
To know when it was cold
Yeah.
versus when it gets hot.
Yeah. And, you know, it helps to plan. If you can look at the calendar and be like, yeah, this day, you know. But yeah, if it just would, with the wrong number of days, too few days, the calendar would actually rotate around the actual year. Right?
36 years later, it would be half off.
Yeah.
Half the year off.
That's right. Another likely global effect of Velikovsky's scenario that should be detectable would be significant changes in climate that may have occurred during the middle of the 8th century BCE as a consequence of a cosmic encounter. Theoretically, these could have been caused by a change in the tilt of Earth's axis, as Velikovsky surmises, but traditional scientists dispute, or the lengthening of the Earth's orbit around the sun. As it turns out, reports of climate changes are quite common in various types of studies of this period. One report from Princeton and Stanford universities on changes in climate in Europe states, between 1850 and 750 BC, there was a broad shift from a hot, dry, subboreal climate regime to a cool, wet sub-Atlantic system. According to one paleoclimatologist, if such a disruption of the climate system were to occur today, the social, economic, and political consequences would be nothing short of catastrophic. And palynology reveals countless local variations, but the general outcome was disastrous for temperate Europe. So another thing is, this is at 757, we're talking about the Mars encounter, the proposed Mars encounter by Velikovsky. It shifts the axis, and this must cause climate change. And yes, during this period, there was enormous amounts of it. So during the supposed encounter with Venus, there's catastrophic effects seen as volcanism. They attribute it to all volcanism. But remember, the guy was like, we see no signs of iridium in the layers. And, remember that? That was maybe a couple of shows ago. Because he was talking about the KT event. Mm-hmm. He was like, the KT event shows definite signs. There's iridium all over the world. But for this proposed thing by Velikovsky, 1500 BC, there's no evidence in the bristlecone pines and all this stuff. But it is. They attribute it to volcanism. But here, there's another disastrous climate change, but there isn't a reason for it, which is interesting.
Isn't the volcanic proxies are like osmium or something like that? The osmium signatures?
Maybe, yeah. J. Darrell Mulholland, one of the scientists previously quoted who presented in opposition to Velikovsky at the 1974 American Association for the Advancement of Science Symposium, stated that a 1 or 2% change in Earth's year could be thinkable, but that a drop from 365-day year to one of 300 days would increase solar heating by 20% and probably be fatal to most life forms on the planet. Based on his perspective, if a shorter year would produce increased solar heating, then an increase in the number of days of the year, such as Velikovsky proposes from 360 to 365, should have produced a corresponding reduction in solar heating and so caused a noticeable global cooling trend sometime just after 750 BCE. And historians note that the Egyptians document an unnamed cooling trend at about 750 to 450 BC, just before the founding of Rome.
Wow.
So did you catch that? The guy at the symposium against Velikovsky, one of the...
Yeah, he's saying like, oh, if there was only 360 days, it would be so hot.
Yeah, but actually he was saying if you change it down to 300 days. So he's just saying like that slow of a day would give the sun much more time to heat that side of the Earth.
360 days.
That he just says, no, the guy was just saying a drop from a 365-day year to one of 300.
Oh.
It's just he was giving an example.
Okay.
So if you drop the amount of days in a year without changing the orbit, but just slow the spin.
Yeah.
Then the side that faces the sun sits there for too long and gets too hot. Right? He says it would increase solar heating by 20% and probably be fatal to most life forms on the planet.
Okay, gotcha.
So all of Laird is pointing out is that if that's true, then spinning it up a little faster to add 5 more days because you're spinning it quicker should cause a cooling trend. Not as drastic, but still,
right.
There should be one. Because the result is, how do you add 5 days to the year? You have to change the spin.
Yeah.
Or you have to move the orbit.
Right.
And maybe it's a little of both. But I thought about this a lot. If you just slightly widen the Earth's orbit, so it takes a little longer to go all the way around the sun, but it spins the same rate, you can add 5 days that way.
Right. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah. If you spin it a little faster and don't change the orbit at all, you end up with 5 more days in a single rotation.
Yeah. So
if you move it a tiny bit and speed it up a tiny bit, which seems more likely to me, then you end up with 5 more days.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm trying to figure out, like, if you move the orbit out a tiny little bit, you might see a cooling trend because you're a little further away, but I mean, it's so minute.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
And it's interesting because, I mean, you spin it faster or slow the spin down, you don't change the total amount of solar energy touching the planet. You're just allowing one side to be heated for longer.
Right.
And because there's this dampening effect of the atmosphere and
also
there's a whole bunch of
insulators.
there's a whole bunch of processes that take place. Yeah.
You give an insulator more time with the heat, it's going to hold it longer, and so
Yeah. So it's an interesting process to think about. But
yeah.
So what do you like moving the orbit more than spinning the planet faster?
Yeah, because for some reason, like the only thing about the rotation that I was thinking is these giant globs of stuff that they've been discovering like deep in the mantle.
Yeah.
That are like offset. They're not centered, right? They're these huge globs that are sort of offset. So it's almost like we've got an imbalance a little bit. So maybe if a gravitational body came by and we had offset center of gravity, you could increase or decrease the spin.
Yeah.
But if we're pretty homogeneous and we have a well-centered center of gravity within the center of mass, then it doesn't seem like that would decrease the spin or increase the spin very much. Like Randall does that demonstration
with the pen.
Where you hold the center and you just can't really hold it. I mean, you're holding it, but you can't stop the spinning.
Yeah.
With that tiny. You don't have any leverage, right? But if you hold it in 2 places, you've got all this leverage. So it makes more sense that if you had a offset density somewhere that could be another center of gravity, that it could change.
Tidal
the spin.
locking would work better.
Yeah. So if something came really close, it could speed it up, it could slow it down.
Yeah.
But other than that, it seems a lot more likely that like in highly elliptical orbits, or I don't remember what they're called. Are they parabolic? Where they come in and then they slingshot around and go out and never come back.
Yeah.
Right? That's going to shift your orbital position slightly.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's going to pull you one direction and then pull you the other direction.
Yep.
And at different rates or whatever, and not necessarily in the right direction to maintain. Like if the angle is right, it can pull you away from the sun or bring you a little closer to it.
Yeah.
It might slow your speed going around the sun.
Yeah.
So then you'd move into a closer orbit. Or it might speed you up and you go into a wider orbit.
Yeah.
That seems more likely to me.
Yeah. But I think he also thinks that it tilted the axis a little bit.
Which is weird. Why would it do that? Because the inertial force of that spin has all that angular momentum and is resisting any tilting of the axis. I mean, you do this with a bike wheel and it's like, you imagine the entire planet spinning like that. It's like, what kind of force would it take to tilt that axis?
Well, this is how the elongated days are explained, because those are in the records. At least
I know. It's just how much of that shift in energy would be taken away from the spin, the angular momentum.
That would be why the spin slowed down.
I know, but why would it do that?
You'd have to move the planet out a much farther, because we were talking about speeding it up to add 5 more days.
Yeah.
Right? So if you actually are slowing the spin down,
you'd have to move it way
out farther. So it would get much colder, and suddenly it would be much more tilted.
Then why does, what was the guy who came up with the mathematics and looking at the positions of the planets as they go out and seeing like, oh, he predicts that there should be a planet here.
Yeah, Bode.
I don't remember what it is, and it's the asteroid belt, right?
Yeah.
So what, like if if our orbit was shifted so much, we shouldn't really fit into that mathematical equation.
Yeah, and neither would Venus. What was in Venus's place?
Yeah, that's a good point.
If it's a resonant system, it should adjust to any new bodies.
Yeah.
But if the first thing that happens...
It's hard to imagine that it's changing the axial tilt without... I mean, I just don't understand the force.
it's acknowledged, even by standard model people, that the only thing that can drastically change the axial tilt of a spinning body is the approach of another body that can do it.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to work. I'm gonna have to work on that one in my head. I just don't understand it. I just don't.
Yeah,
it doesn't make sense to me. I'm not saying it's not true. I don't.
Yeah.
That's not what I would assume.
Yeah.
Based on
another thing that doesn't make sense is the idea of, I mean, this is kind of going off topic, but an axial wobble of the Earth's axis. You know, one example that's given is a top, but a top is sitting on something. The Earth is spinning in space.
Yeah, but you can see, like we talked about this before, you can see on the space station where they unscrew that thing.
Yeah, that's a complete flip.
It wobbles first, and then it eventually gets wide enough to flip, and then, and then it stabilizes and then wobbles again. So that's kind of the way I look at precession. Like maybe this is what we're actually observing, and the idea of this axial tilting, the nod is not really a nod. It actually goes full. It flips over and then stabilizes, and then gets wobbly again, and then flips back over, which could take ridiculous amounts of time. If one single rotation of the wobble of the axis takes 25,000 or almost 26,000 years, you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So
it's going to take a bunch of those to make it flip
the entire
over.
process as it gets wider and wider, which we're noticing as a nod.
Yeah.
But I know what you're saying too, is that the top has its center of mass is up high in the point that it's resting on because gravity's pulling it down. We don't have that situation with the Earth.
That's right. Okay.
Don't know.
Yeah.
Everything I think is probably wrong.
Okay, so Watcher's saying an orbital increase of 5.25 days equals 1.15% increase in orbital distance. In other words, you have to move the Earth out 1,384,200 miles.
Yeah.
Okay. What?
He's just his description of the force that it requires. Yeah.
Yeah.
Does not compute. Yeah, a lot.
It requires a lot of Isaac Newtons. That's all I can figure out.
I am fully willing to accept that we don't understand orbital mechanics,
Yeah.
and all of that stuff. I mean, just, I'm down with that.
Okay. Let's see. John McIntosh Turfa of the University of Pennsylvania Museum writes, in review of a study by Gilda Bartoloni and Filippo Del Pino, although we have outgrown the equation POTS equals people, we still need to reconcile archaeological discoveries with the available historical information about the pre- and proto-historic cultures of Italy. The endeavor is complicated by tantalizing quantifiable evidence from radiocarbon and tree ring analyses. They yield eerily precise absolute dates that do not always match our theories. To complicate matters, it has been shown that radiocarbon dating is affected by a change in the amounts of isotopes taken in by plants and animals during the crucial early centuries of the first millennium BC, and thus dates given in older literature are no longer reliable. Further, soil conditions in most Italian sites have not preserved the wood samples needed to calibrate dates by tree ring comparisons, as has been possible for Transalpine Europe. Analytical studies have shown that the radiocarbon decline in the atmosphere occurred circa 850 to 760 BC, and abrupt global climate changes ensued around 800 BC, rendering many European sites unsustainable due to cold, wet weather. And there is growing evidence of similar travails, both climatic and social, in early Italy. So this is more of the evidence of climate change right in this period. So, yet another study, this time of the radiocarbon content in tree rings that focused on the same 8th century BCE time period, also reports significant fluctuations in radiocarbon levels that could be consonant with Velikovsky's scenario. It states, fluctuations in the atmospheric radiocarbon level observed by measurements of the radiocarbon content of tree ring dated wood are caused by changes in the geomagnetic field and in the activity of the sun. There are also indications for correlations of these carbon-14 fluctuations with climatic changes. If one assumes that the observed correlations are significant, then one might suspect that major climatic changes have occurred during the 8th century BC. So, in other words, they're specifically looking for trees or tree rings that date that they can count to the period they want to look at. Then they take material from that ring and then they radiocarbon date it to see what number the radiocarbon dating analysis gives them when they know how old that ring is because they've been counting rings, right? No, quote unquote, no.
Ostensibly, yeah, they know how old it is, yeah.
And what they find out is right in this period, there's this massively increased amount of radiocarbon. And they're saying the only thing that can cause that, or the only known things that can cause that, is activity of the sun and massive changes in the geomagnetic field.
Basically allowing
more stuff, more cosmic rays
to
to penetrate, Okay. Just as the magnetic fields of Venus or Mars may have left a residual impact on the rocks of the moon and on lava flows on Earth, so these interactions may also have had a measurable impact on the magnetic field of Earth itself. In the context of a discussion of his correct prognostication, Velikovsky is quoted in the Velikovsky Affair as stating, H.E. Seuss, because of an accumulation of certain discrepancies in the radiocarbon dates, assumes that natural events caused a radical change in the intensity of the magnetosphere in the influx of cosmic rays sometime in the second millennium before the present era. Several other researchers came to the same conclusion, and this is also in harmony with the story related in my book. So yeah, they're seeing this massive influx of cosmogenic materials, which changes the way that they have to calibrate the radiocarbon dating, and they're assuming that it must be a result of massive changes in the magnetosphere and in the activity of the sun. But Velikovsky's just pointing out that, like, hey, this matches with what I've been saying in the book. The processes are unknown. These guys are assuming it's sun and magnetosphere. Maybe it is the magnetosphere changing, but it might be changing. Why would it be changing? What's the mechanism for that?
Right, like it could have been in solar outbursts or whatever, but
yeah. Or it could be the close encounter with another large body that would change this magnetic field. Another recent article discusses the phenomenon of geomagnetic reversal and the effects it can have on our planet. The article, titled Geomagnetic Reversal and Its Effects, states, the pattern in magnetic reversal is not periodic, showing reversals that can occur in short periods of 100,000 years apart to periods that are millions of years between them. This process suggests that some agency has triggered a flip or reorientation of the magnetosphere on a regular, if not uniform, basis. So what he's pointing out there is that, yes, the magnetic field changes, flips, has fluctuations, but the process for this is completely unknown, and it doesn't appear to be uniform.
It's not cyclical.
Unless their dating is all off.
Oh, yeah. Well.
He doesn't say that, but I'm just pointing it out. Like, it may not look uniform because
tree rings, I would say, are pretty reliable. Yeah, maybe you missed a year, but that's not...
Yeah.
That's pretty accurate.
You might miss 2 years.
Yeah, still.
Nuclear winter of 50 years might miss all those. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
Well, that would kill the trees, right? And then you wouldn't have trees next to each other.
Yeah, there'd be a gap, and you wouldn't know how many years that was. So, yeah, you'd have to... if there were global periods in which
you would
no
have
trees
you
grew.
would have other trees in other areas that would seem to
unless it was
show
a global effect. But yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could have entire centuries that are gone if no tree grew during those periods.
Would be hard for people to be alive with history.
That's why they had to go underground. But yeah, I agree that the tree ring dating is I'd say very solid, and the ice core dating also fairly solid. But when you're talking about dating things that are trying to date a cycle of magnetic reversals that are in the millions and hundreds of thousands and millions of years,
Right.
you're no longer dealing with tree rings and ice cores.
Yeah, true.
So I don't know. It may be cyclical, but maybe not. It just may look non-cyclical because of the way the dates come up. So, should we stop there?
Yeah, I think
yeah,
so.
I think we're out of time. I just noticed that. Okay.
Good stuff. Enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah. Well, next week, we'll be going into the bamboo annals of Chinese history.
Bamboo ring dating. Some of the best dates in the world.
Yeah, lots of interesting stuff and processes that we don't understand. I love the dating
Me too.
trap. I'm just like, this is so interesting.
And I want to build cool experiments with gyroscopes and stuff to kind of try to figure out how you can change poles with strange interactions.
Yeah, can we build a gyroscope magnet and spin it and then run another magnet past it and see if it pulls the axis over?
Yeah.
Come on.
Okay, now you're talking magnetism, yeah, but I mean, how?
Well, magnetism is
How
mimicking the effect of gravity in that case, is all I'm saying.
Okay.
So you got, I mean, we can't generate a bunch of
Except
gravity.
that it has poles, like,
Yeah, it's polar. I know.
Yeah,
So you have to run the right side past. But still, I bet you could. You could get that thing spinning, and then if you did it right, you could run a magnet past it and pull the axis
Yeah, I'm
over.
sure you could because
And then it would be going.
because that attraction, that polar attraction, is so strong with the magnets, whereas with gravity, there's not.
It's not
really a polar attraction,
Right.
It doesn't matter where you're at. It's the same. It's
Yeah.
the same force. Supposedly, that's what they say.
But I think Velikovsky is arguing for large magnetic forces interacting on these bodies.
Right. Well, if gravity is actually a phenomenon of magnetism, then yeah.
Yeah.
This makes,
But even if
makes
not-
a lot more sense.
even if not, even if just the magnetic forces are.
I can hear you, Electric Universe people out there yelling at your phones right now. Shush. I'm working on it. I'm coming around.
Stop yelling at us right now.
Stop yelling at me.
All right. Well, I think that was a good show. We didn't get through as much of the book as I wanted to, but that's fine. Great conversations and discussions in between.
Yeah, I enjoyed it.
Yep. So
Thank you, Watcher.
yeah, thanks to the watcher.
Good input.
Let's see, where are we at here? We're okay, yeah, maybe one more show. Just looking at what we got here. I think maybe one more episode, possibly two.
Jesus, he's doing Watcher math. big
Yeah, there's
time.
watcher math up there. I have no idea what he's talking about. Okay. You guys can get a hold of us, brothersoftheserpent@gmail.com. And remember, just keep sending those emails. I'm able to read fewer and fewer of them on the show, but I read all of them as they come in. So thank you guys very much for sending those emails. And if your email doesn't get read on the show, just send another one at some point. Eventually it'll happen. Website is brothersoftheserpent.com. Go there to find the encyclopedia or the glossary, the snake skins, and that is also where you can find the buttons to join the pyramid scheme using either Patreon or PayPal. And thanks so much to all of you who have donated to the show that way. It helps us go on trips like the one we just went on. That would not have been possible without all of you guys, so thank you so much.
Yeah.
Give us reviews wherever you can, but especially in the iTunes podcast place, the Apple iTunes, whatever it's called. Still don't know what it's called. Give us reviews there on iTunes. Helps the show. And share the show wherever you can. Follow us on Twitter at Snake Bros with no vowels, SNKBRS. I am posting images of our trip to Twitter right now, but if you don't follow us on Twitter, you can also join the Discord group because we posted like every picture we took and a bunch of videos, goofy videos that we took in the Discord. So you can sign up for the Discord, or you can follow us on Twitter, or do both. And also, Jeff runs the Library of the Serpent and the Discord, so thanks very much to him. The library is an excellent resource, and there's links to that on the website, so check that out. Thanks to History Shift, who makes all of our YouTube videos. You guys can follow him at History Shift on YouTube and on Twitter, and go to his website, historyshift.com. Also, Pod Doodles, who takes some of our podcasts and turns them into doodles that you can watch while listening to the show. It's really cool. Check him out. Don't forget about Cosmographia, which I'm sure most of you know, the podcast we do with Randall Carlson and Brad. And thanks to Where Did the Road Go, Uncharted X, Mike and Maurice's Mind Escape, The C Word, Grimerica, Conspiranormal, 7 Ages Audio Journal, and Skeptico.
Yeah. And also, the archive shows are on the website.
That's right.
Isn't that?
I need to keep remembering. I need to remember to say that. Yeah. I need to make a new one of these lists.
In your podcast feed,
This is outdated.
there will only be 100 objects. So for the older shows, go to the website. You can download them there. Isn't there also in the Discord, there's like a link to all of them in there?
Yeah, in the Discord, there's a chat room called Episode List. And every episode is named and listed in there in order. And no one's allowed to post in that channel. So you can just go in there, and all it is a list of episodes. So you can scroll back and find whatever episode you want. And yes, there is an archive page on the website to help you. Just puts them all in a row. The names aren't in there. I need to go in there eventually and do a bunch of work and add all the names. Right now, it's just episode 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Yeah. And special thanks to Fontini for helping us out on our road trip. Appreciate that, buddy. Following your advice. No results yet, but
Hey,
great job. Always there.
Fontini.
Yeah.
You know,
And from the bottom of our sizable hearts, we love you.
always have.
Always will.
Good night, Adamu.
Get back to work.
And such.